When I stumbled upon my wife's diary, it was purely by accident. I was searching for some old documents, rummaging through drawers in the study. The afternoon sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. As I shuffled through the papers, a small leather-bound book fell out from behind a stack of old files. At first, I thought it was just an old journal or a forgotten notebook. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up, feeling the smooth, worn leather beneath my fingers. I flipped open the cover, expecting to find grocery lists or perhaps notes about our children's schedules. The initial entries seemed innocuous enough. Notes about her day plans for the future and reflections on our life together. A smile tugged at my lips as I read about our anniversary dinner last year, the surprise trip I had planned for her birthday. But then, my eyes caught a name, Michael. The entry was dated 2 years ago, and as I read further, my heart began to race. It detailed a night she spent with him, a night of passion and betrayal. My stomach churned, and my hands started to tremble. I reread the passage, hoping I had misunderstood, but the words remained the same, staring back at me, mocking my ignorance. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I felt a surge of anger, hot, burning anger that made my chest tighten and my fists clench. How could she do this to me? To us? We had built a life together and shared dreams and promises, and yet, here was evidence of her betrayal, written in her hand. I flipped through more pages, desperate to understand, to find some explanation. Each new entry revealed another name: David, Brian, Kevin, Joshua, Chris, Mark, Paul, Eric, and Stephen. 10 men, 10 affairs. My wife had been unfaithful to me 10 times, and I had been completely oblivious. Each name felt like a dagger, plunging deeper into my heart, leaving a trail of pain and confusion. Tears filled my eyes as I sank into the chair by the desk, the diary still clutched in my hands. The words blurred, but their meaning was all too clear. I felt a profound sense of loss, not just of my wife, but of the life I thought we had. The happy memories we had shared now felt tainted, corrupted by her deceit, betrayal. The word echoed in my mind over and over. I had always prided myself on our strong, loving relationship. I had trusted her completely, never doubting her loyalty. Now that trust was shattered, broken beyond repair. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had deceived me in the most painful way possible. As the reality of her infidelity settled in, a sense of determination began to take root. I couldn't let this go unanswered. I couldn't let her actions remain hidden in the pages of a diary. She needed to face the consequences of her actions. And so, I made a decision that would change everything. The initial shock of discovering my wife's infidelity slowly gave way to a gnawing need for answers. I couldn't just leave it at Michael. I had to know the full extent of her betrayal. The names and details in her diary haunted me, each one a new wound, but I needed to understand everything. I spent the next few days going through her diary meticulously. Every time I opened it, a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. It felt like peeling back layers of a wound that refused to heal. Each name brought back memories of times when I thought our relationship was solid, only to realize now that she had been living a double life. David was the next name after Michael. His entry was marked with a date when I had been away on a business trip. As I read the details, a vivid picture formed in my mind. I could almost see them together, laughing and sharing moments that should have been ours alone. The betrayal cut deep, but I pushed on, determined to uncover every last detail. Brian came after David. His affair with my wife seemed to have started during a particularly stressful period at her job. She described finding solace in his arms, a place where she felt understood and appreciated. My hands shook as I read her words. How could she turn to someone else for comfort when I was right there, willing to support her through anything? Kevin's entry was next. He was an old college friend who had resurfaced in our lives a few years ago. I remember thinking it was nice for her to reconnect with an old friend. Little did I know, their rekindled friendship had crossed lines that should never have been crossed. I felt a surge of anger and humiliation. How could I have been so blind? Joshua's affair with her seemed to be more fleeting, a brief encounter during a work conference. Yet even in its brevity, it stung just as much. Chris was another colleague, someone she saw regularly. Reading about their secret meetings and their stolen moments together made me feel physically ill. I had trusted her completely, never doubting her loyalty, and she had thrown that trust away so carelessly. Mark, Paul, Eric, Stephen. The names blurred together as I continued reading. Each entry was a new revelation of deceit, each one a testament to her complete disregard for our vows. My mind swirled with a mixture of anger, sadness, and disbelief. These were not just random flings. They were calculated betrayals, each one more devastating than the last. By the time I finished reading, I felt drained, as if the weight of her infidelities had physically worn me down. I sat there for a long time, the diary open on my lap, trying to process everything. It felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But amidst the pain and confusion, a cold, determined resolve began to form. I couldn't let her get away with this. She needed to face the consequences of her actions, and the world needed to know the truth. I decided then and there to take action. I created an anonymous account on a popular social media platform. My hands trembled slightly as I typed out the first post, listing Michael's name and a brief description of their affair. It felt like a small victory, a step towards reclaiming my life and exposing her for the liar she was. Over the next few days, I continued to post the names one by one: David, Brian, Kevin, Joshua, Chris, Mark, Paul, Eric, and Stephen. Each post garnered more attention, drawing comments and reactions from people who were just as shocked and appalled as I was. Some reached out privately, offering words of support and encouragement. A few even shared their own stories of betrayal, creating a strange sense of camaraderie among strangers, united by a common pain. As the posts gained traction, I began to feel a sense of empowerment. I was no longer a passive victim in this story. I was taking control, exposing her lies, and demanding accountability. The world was starting to see her for who she was, and there was no turning back. The response to my posts was overwhelming. Each new revelation drew more attention, comments, and messages. The story of my wife's betrayal spread like wildfire across social media. Strangers offered their support, sharing their own tales of infidelity and heartbreak. The solidarity was a small comfort, but it couldn't erase the pain of what I had discovered. Among the messages, one stood out. It was from Michael, the first name I had uncovered in her diary. He reached out privately, his words a mix of apology and confession. He admitted to the affair, expressing regret, and claiming he hadn't known she was married at the time. I felt a surge of anger reading his words, but also a strange sense of validation. His confession confirmed everything and made it all the more real. Emboldened by his message, I knew I had to confront my wife. I couldn't let this fester any longer. One evening, when the house was quiet and the kids were in bed, I called her into the living room. My heart pounded in my chest as she sat down, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "I found your diary," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and sadness. "I know about Michael, and David, and Brian. I know about all of them." Her face paled, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I handed her the diary, opened to one of the damning entries, and watched as she read her own words, the color draining from her face. "How could you?" I demanded, my voice rising. "How could you do this to us? To me?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she finally found her voice. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for you to find out like this. I felt so alone, so neglected. You were always busy, always working. I needed someone to talk to, someone who understood me." "Don't you dare blame this on me," I snapped. "I was working to provide for our family. I was doing everything I could to give us a good life, and this is how you repay me." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," she repeated. "I know I've made terrible mistakes. I know I've hurt you. Please give me a chance to make it right." But her tears and apologies felt hollow. I had seen the depth of her deceit, and I couldn't unsee it. "It's too late for that," I said, my voice cold and final. "I want a divorce." Her sobs turned into desperate pleas, but I had made up my mind. The trust was shattered, and there was no way to rebuild it. I stood up, leaving her crying on the couch, and went to our bedroom, closing the door behind me. The weight of what I had done, of the finality of my decision, pressed down on me, but I knew it was the right choice. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations and difficult conversations. I hired a lawyer and started the divorce proceedings. I was determined to get my fair share of our assets and to ensure that our children would be taken care of. Meanwhile, the posts continued to gain traction online. Some of the other men mentioned in the diary reached out to me, apologizing and confirming the affairs. Their messages were a mixed blessing, providing further validation, but also reopening the wounds each time. As the dust settled from the initial confrontation, the reality of what lay ahead began to sink in. Divorce wasn't just a word. It was a complicated, grueling process that would force me to relive the pain of her betrayal over and over again. But I was determined to see it through. I needed closure, and I needed to reclaim my life. The first step was to hire a lawyer. I chose a well-respected attorney known for handling difficult divorce cases. Her name was Claire, and from our first meeting, I knew I was in good hands. She was sharp, compassionate, and most importantly, unwavering in her commitment to securing the best possible outcome for me. "Sam," Claire said, leaning forward in her chair, "this is going to be tough, but you have a strong case. Infidelity is a serious breach of trust, and given the extent of her affairs, we have a solid foundation to work with." I nodded, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. "I just want this to be over. I want to move on with my life." "We'll get there," she assured me. "First, we need to gather evidence. The diary is a good start, but we'll need more." Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with Claire to compile everything we needed. I handed over the diary, shared the messages I had received from the other men, and provided financial documents to ensure we had a clear picture of our assets. Every piece of evidence felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage, but it was necessary. The day we filed for divorce, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was the beginning of the end, and while the road ahead was still fraught with challenges, I was taking decisive steps to reclaim my life. My wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, was served with the papers while I was at work. I couldn't bear to see her reaction in person, but I knew it was a shock she deserved. The initial proceedings were tense. We sat on opposite sides of the table, our lawyers acting as intermediaries. She looked worn and defeated, her eyes red from crying, but I couldn't afford to feel sympathy. This was about justice, about holding her accountable for her actions. Claire was relentless, outlining the extent of her infidelities and the emotional and financial toll they had taken on me. My wife's lawyer tried to downplay the significance of the affairs, but the evidence was overwhelming. The diary entries, the messages from the men, and my own testimony painted a clear picture of betrayal. During one particularly heated session, her lawyer attempted to turn the tables. "Your Honor, my client felt neglected and isolated. She made mistakes, but she was driven to them by the emotional distance in her marriage." I felt a surge of anger and leaned forward, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I was working hard to provide for our family. I was doing everything I could to make sure we had a good life. Her response to feeling neglected was to cheat on me with 10 different men. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern of deceit. The judge nodded, clearly taking my words to heart. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson. We will take all of this into consideration." As the weeks went by, the legal battles continued. We argued over custody arrangements, division of assets, and spousal support. Each discussion was a reminder of what we had lost, but also a step towards rebuilding my future. Claire was a fierce advocate, ensuring that I received a fair settlement and that our children's needs were prioritized. Amidst the legal wrangling, I found solace in my friends and family. They were my rock, providing emotional support and practical help. My parents took turns watching the kids when I had to attend court sessions, and my best friend Mark frequently checked in on me, making sure I was holding up. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, I sat down with Mark over a couple of beers. "This is the hardest thing I've ever done," I admitted, taking a long sip. "But I know it's the right thing." He nodded, his eyes filled with empathy. "You're doing the right thing, Sam. You deserve better than this, and you'll come out of it stronger." His words resonated with me. I was starting to believe that I could rebuild my life, that there was a future beyond the pain of betrayal. The legal process was a necessary step, but it wasn't the end. It was a means to an end, a way to find justice and start anew. As the final court date approached, I felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. This would be the culmination of months of emotional turmoil and legal battles. Claire had prepared me well, and I knew we had a strong case. But there was still a part of me that dreaded the finality of it all. When the day arrived, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. My wife was already there, looking pale and nervous. We exchanged a brief glance, but there was nothing left to say. The judge reviewed the evidence, listened to the final arguments, and then delivered the verdict. Based on the evidence presented, I find in favor of Mr. Anderson. The divorce is granted, and the terms of the settlement are as follows. As the judge outlined the terms, a sense of relief washed over me. It was done. The marriage was over, and I could finally start to move forward. The settlement was fair, and the custody arrangements ensured that our children would be well taken care of. After the hearing, Claire congratulated me on the outcome. "You did great, Sam. This is a new beginning for you." I shook her hand, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Claire. I couldn't have done this without you." As I walked out of the courtroom, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few months lift off my shoulders. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I was free. Free from the lies, the deceit, and the pain. It was time to rebuild my life piece by piece and create a future I could be proud of. With the legal battle behind me and the divorce officially finalized, I began the arduous process of rebuilding my life. Yet even as I tried to move forward, the repercussions of my wife's actions continued to ripple through my world. One unexpected consequence was the flood of messages from the men whose names I had exposed. It started with Michael, the first man I had discovered in the diary. After his initial message, he reached out again, asking to meet in person. At first I was hesitant. What could he possibly say that would make any of this better? But my curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. I arrived early, my mind racing with thoughts of what this conversation would be like. When Michael walked in, I recognized him immediately. He looked nervous, but he approached me with a tentative smile. "Sam, thank you for agreeing to meet," he began, extending his hand. I shook it, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Let's just get this over with." We sat down, and he took a deep breath. "First, I want to apologize. I had no idea she was married when we were together. When I found out, I ended things immediately." His words were sincere, and I could see the guilt in his eyes. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied, though it did little to ease the pain. Michael continued, explaining how he had met my wife at a work event and how she had never mentioned she was married. As he spoke, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. This was just one of many men she had deceived, all part of a web of lies that had ensnared us all. After we finished our conversation, Michael left, and I sat there for a while, processing everything. His apology didn't change what had happened, but it did provide a small measure of closure. At least now, I knew the truth from his perspective. In the weeks that followed, I received messages from several other men mentioned in the diary. Each one brought a different reaction. Brian reached out next, his message filled with regret and a similar story of being misled. He too had ended the affair as soon as he discovered she was married. Paul, on the other hand, was defensive. His message was short and curt, denying any wrongdoing and claiming that my wife had told him we were separated. His lack of remorse only fueled my anger, but I chose not to engage further. There was no point in arguing with someone who refused to take responsibility. Chris and Kevin both sent heartfelt apologies, expressing their regret and offering to meet if I needed to talk. I declined the meetings, but appreciated their sincerity. Their messages helped me understand that my wife's deception had reached far beyond our marriage, affecting the lives of many others. One message stood out from the rest. It was from Eric, who admitted he had known about our marriage, but had pursued the affair anyway. His message was filled with guilt and shame, and he expressed deep remorse for his actions. Reading his words, I felt a surge of anger, but also a strange sense of pity. He had knowingly participated in the betrayal, and now he had to live with the consequences. As these conversations unfolded, I began to see a clearer picture of my wife's infidelities. Each man had been caught in her web of lies, some more knowingly than others. It was a painful process, but it also helped me understand that the fault lay primarily with her. She had manipulated and deceived us all. Despite the pain, these interactions provided a strange sense of closure. I confronted the reality of her actions, faced the men involved, and emerged on the other side with a clearer understanding of what had happened. It was a necessary step in my healing process. With each message, I felt a bit lighter, as if I were shedding the weight of her betrayal piece by piece. My friends and family continued to support me, reminding me that I was not defined by her actions, but by how I chose to move forward. One evening, as I sat on my porch reflecting on everything, I realized that these conversations had helped me find a new perspective. They had shown me that while I couldn't change the past, I could choose how to respond to it. I could choose to rebuild my life with honesty and integrity, surrounded by people who truly cared about me. It was a long road ahead, but I was ready to face it. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to shape. With the support of my loved ones and the strength I had found within myself, I knew I could build a new life, one free from deceit and filled with genuine connections. As I stood up and walked back into the house, I felt a sense of hope. The scars of betrayal would always be there, but they no longer defined me. I was ready to start anew, to create a life built on trust and authenticity. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all. Life after the divorce was a new frontier. For the first time in years, I was on my own. The house felt emptier and quieter, and the absence of my wife was both a relief and a source of melancholy. I had to learn how to navigate this new reality, to find a rhythm that worked for me and my kids. The mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up and for a brief moment forget everything that had happened. Then reality would crash down on me, and I'd have to muster the strength to get out of bed and face the day. My kids, Emma and Luke, were my motivation. They needed stability, and I was determined to provide that for them. The first few weeks were a blur of adjusting routines and finding new ways to manage the household. I had to balance work, parenting, and my own healing process. I started cooking more, learning new recipes that the kids loved. We established new traditions, like Saturday morning pancakes and movie nights on Fridays. These small rituals helped create a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos. At work, I threw myself into my projects. The focus helped distract me from the pain, and my colleagues were supportive, giving me space when I needed it and encouragement when I felt overwhelmed. My boss, Mark, knew about the divorce and offered his understanding, even allowing me some flexibility with my hours when necessary. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I sat down with a glass of wine and my laptop. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I opened my social media accounts, curious to see if there had been any developments since my last post. To my surprise, I had received a flurry of messages from old friends, some of whom I hadn't spoken to in years. They had seen my posts and reached out to offer their support. Reading their messages, I felt a warmth that had been missing for a long time. These were people who cared about me, who were there for me despite the distance and the years that had passed. I replied to each message, grateful for their kindness. Reconnecting with old friends was a step towards rebuilding my social life, which had taken a back seat during my marriage. A few days later, I received a message from an old college buddy, Jake. He had seen my posts and suggested meeting up for a drink. I hesitated at first, but then decided it was time to start reconnecting with the world. We met at a local bar, and it was like no time had passed. We laughed and shared stories, and I realized how much I had missed this camaraderie. Jake's presence in my life became a beacon of light. He encouraged me to join him and his friends for various activities, hiking, poker nights, and even a weekend fishing trip. These outings were a welcome distraction and helped me rediscover parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of my marriage's collapse. As I adjusted to a single life, I also made an effort to focus on my personal growth. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Thompson, who helped me navigate the complex emotions that came with my wife's betrayal and the subsequent divorce. Therapy sessions were intense, but they provided a safe space to process my feelings and begin the healing process. Dr. Thompson encouraged me to set new goals for myself, both personally and professionally. I decided to take up running, something I'd always enjoyed but had let slip away over the years. I started with short jogs around the neighborhood, gradually building up to longer runs. The physical exertion was cathartic, and I began to feel stronger, both mentally and physically. My kids were also adjusting to the new normal. Emma, who was 10, had a lot of questions about why Mommy and Daddy weren't together anymore. I did my best to explain things in a way she could understand, assuring her that both her parents loved her very much. Luke, who was 6, seemed to take things in stride, though I could see the confusion in his eyes sometimes. We spent a lot of time together, going to the park, playing games, and just being there for each other. One Saturday afternoon, as we were sitting on the porch enjoying the warm weather, Emma turned to me and said, "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" Her question took me by surprise, but I looked into her eyes and smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be just fine. We have each other, and that's what matters." Her face lit up with a smile and she hugged me tightly. At that moment, I realized that we were indeed going to be okay. The path ahead was still uncertain, but we had each other, and we had the strength to face whatever came our way. As the months passed, I continued to rebuild my life, one step at a time. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and found solace in the simple joys of everyday life. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined me. I was learning to live again, to embrace the future with hope and determination. And as I looked at my children, I knew that we were not just surviving, we were thriving. The scars of the past would always be there, but they were a testament to our strength and resilience. We were a family, and we would face the future together, stronger than ever before. Adjusting to single life had been a whirlwind of challenges and self-discovery, but as the months passed, I began to find a rhythm. My children were thriving, my work was stable, and I had started to reconnect with old friends. Yet, there was still a void in my life, a space that had once been filled with companionship and love. It was during one of my evening runs that I first noticed her. She was jogging along the same path, her pace steady and confident. We exchanged brief, polite nods the first few times we crossed paths. She had a warm, approachable aura, and I found myself looking forward to our fleeting encounters. One evening, as I finished my run and was stretching on a park bench, she approached me. "Hi, I've seen you around here a lot. Mind if I join you for a cool down?" "Not at all," I replied, smiling. "I'm Sam." "Nice to meet you, Sam. I'm Rachel," she said, extending her hand. We talked as we stretched, and I learned that Rachel was a nurse who lived a few blocks away. She had moved to the neighborhood about a year ago. Our conversation flowed easily, and before we knew it, an hour had passed. We agreed to meet up for a run again, and over the next few weeks it became a regular thing. Running with Rachel was refreshing. She was funny, intelligent, and had a positive outlook on life. Our runs were filled with laughter and deep conversations. I found myself looking forward to them more and more, and it wasn't long before our friendship started to feel like something more. One evening, after a particularly invigorating run, we decided to grab a coffee at a nearby cafe. Sitting across from her, I felt a connection that I hadn't felt in a long time. There was an ease between us, a natural chemistry that was both exciting and comforting. "Sam," Rachel said, looking at me with a gentle smile, "I really enjoy our runs together, and I'd love to get to know you better, outside of running." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a flutter of nervous excitement. "I'd like that too, Rachel," I replied, smiling back at her. We started spending more time together, going on casual dates and enjoying each other's company. Rachel was understanding of my situation and supportive of my role as a single dad. She met Emma and Luke gradually, and they warmed up to her quickly. She had a natural rapport with them, and I could see how much they liked having her around. One sunny Saturday, we all went to the zoo together. Watching Rachel interact with my kids, seeing the genuine care and affection she showed them, made my heart swell. As we watched Emma and Luke feed the giraffes, Rachel turned to me and took my hand. "Your kids are wonderful, Sam," she said, her eyes sparkling. "You've done an amazing job with them." "Thanks, Rachel," I replied, squeezing her hand. "They're my world, and I'm really glad you're a part of it." As our relationship deepened, I found myself opening up to Rachel in ways I hadn't with anyone else since the divorce. I shared my fears, my hopes, and the lingering pain from my past. She listened without judgment, offering comfort and understanding. One evening, as we sat on my porch, watching the stars, I told her about my wife's betrayal and the toll it had taken on me. Rachel listened quietly, her hand resting on mine, and when I finished, she leaned in and kissed me gently. "You've been through so much, Sam," she said softly, "but you're strong and you deserve to be happy. I'm here for you, whatever you need." Her words touched me deeply, and I realized that I was beginning to fall in love with her. Rachel was everything I had been missing, kind, supportive, and genuine. She brought light into my life, and I felt a sense of hope and possibility that I hadn't felt in a long time. As the months went by, our relationship continued to grow. We spent more time together, blending our lives and our routines. Rachel became a steady presence in my kids' lives, and they adored her. She respected the boundaries I had set, understanding that we were all still healing in our own ways. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, Rachel turned to me with a serious expression. "Sam, I want you to know that I'm here for the long haul. I love you and I love your kids. I want to be a part of your life, all of it." Her words took my breath away. I had been so focused on rebuilding my life, I hadn't fully realized how deeply I had come to care for Rachel. Looking into her eyes, I knew that she was the future I had been hoping for. "I love you too, Rachel," I said, pulling her into my arms. "And I want us to build a life together, as a family." From that moment on, our bond grew even stronger. We navigated the ups and downs of blending our lives, facing challenges together, and celebrating the joys. Rachel brought a sense of stability and joy to our lives that had been missing for so long. Finding new love wasn't something I had expected, but it was a gift I cherished. With Rachel by my side, I felt ready to face the future with optimism and confidence. The past had left its scars, but they no longer defined me. I had found love again, and with it, a renewed sense of purpose and happiness. As I looked at Rachel and my children, I knew that we were not just surviving. We were thriving. We had created a new life together, one filled with love, trust, and hope for the future. And for that, I was endlessly grateful. My new life with Rachel was blossoming, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a profound sense of happiness. Emma and Luke were adjusting well, and our blended family was beginning to find its own rhythm. However, I knew that the peace we were enjoying might be disrupted once my ex-wife, Jessica, learned about Rachel. Jessica had been a sporadic presence in the kids' lives since the divorce. She had visitation rights, but her focus had shifted to her own life, which seemed to revolve around the latest boyfriend or social event. Nevertheless, I was determined to keep her informed about significant changes, if only to maintain a sense of transparency for Emma and Luke. One Friday evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat down to draft an email to Jessica. It took several attempts to find the right words, but eventually I settled on a straightforward approach. Subject. Update on our lives, Hi Jessica, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to share some news with you directly. Over the past few months, I've started seeing someone new. Her name is Rachel, and she's become an important part of my life and the kids' lives. Emma and Luke really like her, and she's been wonderful with them. I thought it was important for you to know about this change. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out. Best, Sam. I sent the email and waited, knowing that her reaction could be unpredictable. 2 days later, I received a reply. Subject. Update on our lives, Sam. I'm surprised to hear about Rachel, but I guess I shouldn't be. I hope this relationship is good for you and the kids. I'd like to meet her at some point to see who's spending time with Emma and Luke. Jessica. Her response was relatively calm, though the underlying tension was palpable. I discussed it with Rachel, and we agreed it was best to arrange a meeting. We chose a neutral location, a park where the kids could play while the adults talked. The day of the meeting, my stomach was in knots. Rachel, sensing my anxiety, squeezed my hand reassuringly. "It'll be okay, Sam. We'll handle this together." When we arrived at the park, Jessica was already there, sitting on a bench. She stood up as we approached, her expression a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Hi, Jessica," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "This is Rachel." Rachel extended her hand with a warm smile. "Nice to meet you, Jessica." Jessica shook Rachel's hand, her smile strained. "Nice to meet you too." We sat down, and I could feel the tension in the air. The kids were playing nearby, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents between the adults. I decided to break the ice. "Jessica, I wanted you to meet Rachel because she's become an important part of our lives. I think it's important that we all communicate openly for the sake of the kids." Jessica nodded, though her eyes remained on Rachel. "I appreciate that, Sam. And Rachel, I hope you understand how important Emma and Luke are to me." Rachel's expression was sincere. "Of course, Jessica. I care about them a lot. and I just want to support them and Sam in any way I can. There was a moment of silence, and then Jessica's demeanor softened slightly. Well, as long as the kids are happy, that's what matters. The conversation continued, with Rachel and Jessica discussing their approaches to parenting and how best to support Emma and Luke. By the end of the meeting, while it was clear that Jessica was still wary, a tentative understanding had been reached. Over the next few weeks, Jessica remained civil but distant whenever Rachel was mentioned. It was an improvement, albeit a small one. The most important thing was that the kids were adjusting well. They continued to thrive in the new family dynamic, and Rachel's presence brought a sense of stability that was much needed. One afternoon, as I was picking up the kids from Jessica's place, she pulled me aside. "Sam, I can see that Rachel makes you happy, and the kids seem to like her too. I just want what's best for them." Her words were a surprise, and I felt a flicker of hope. "Thanks, Jessica. That means a lot." As I drove home with Emma and Luke, I felt a sense of relief. Jessica's acceptance, however tentative, was a positive step forward. It meant fewer conflicts and a more harmonious environment for our children. That evening, as Rachel and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I told her about Jessica's words. Rachel smiled and rested her head on my shoulder. "That's a good sign, Sam. It shows that we're all moving forward." I wrapped my arm around her, feeling a deep sense of contentment. Despite the challenges and the painful past, we were building a new life together. And with each passing day, that life was becoming brighter and more filled with hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with Rachel by my side and the support of my family and friends, I knew we could face whatever came our way. We were creating something beautiful out of the ashes of the past, and that was a testament to our strength and resilience. Together, we were moving forward, one step at a time, towards a future filled with love and possibility. I felt that the worst was over, and I have a bright future ahead of me.